Most people experience anger as if it's a fixed trait, a defining characteristic of who they are in that moment. But this is a misinterpretation, both psychologically and biologically. Anger is not an identity. It is a transient neurochemical response to a perceived threat, violation, or loss of control. At its core, anger is a survival mechanism. It's part of the same ancestral circuitry that helped us fight off predators, defend our territory, or assert dominance within a social hierarchy. But the modern world has repurposed that system. Now, instead of threats to life or limb, we get triggered by tone of voice, traffic delays, or someone not texting back in time. When you feel angry, your amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, becomes hyperactive. It sends rapid signals to the hypothalamus and brainstem, which initiate a chain reaction. Heart rate increases, blood vessels constrict, breathing gets shallow, and stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline begin flooding the system. In a split second, your entire physiology prepares you for confrontation or defense. But here's the key insight: the feeling of anger is not the problem. The problem is how identified we become with that feeling. We don't just say, "I feel anger," we say, "I am angry." That's a neurological short-cut your brain takes, conflating signal with identity, and that fusion is what causes damage to relationships, performance, and your own clarity. Anger is information. It's telling you something. There is a perceived violation of your boundaries, your expectations, or your status. But that's just it, a perception. It may or may not be accurate. The brain reacts faster than the prefrontal cortex can analyze. Your initial emotional response is raw data. If you can learn to recognize anger as a signal, like a dashboard warning light, you can work with it instead of being hijacked by it. This is where naming becomes a tool. Saying "this is anger" instead of "I'm angry" begins to rewire the link between your emotional experience and your identity. Functional MRI studies show that when individuals label their emotional states in real time, the amygdala calms down and prefrontal regions involved in control and reasoning increase in activity. By doing this consistently, you start shifting from being someone who is run by emotion to someone who can observe emotion without collapsing into it. The space between stimulus and response is not a metaphor. It's a measurable, physical window. And within that window lies your control. Most people assume their reactions are automatic and unchangeable, but that assumption only holds true when they are disconnected from their internal signals. Interception is the key to expanding this space. It is the capacity to sense the internal state of your body, heartbeat, breath, muscle tension, digestive changes, and subtle shifts in arousal. While exteroception governs what you perceive outside of you: sound, light, motion, interoception is the system that informs you of what's happening inside. It's the earliest indicator that something is changing emotionally or physiologically. In the context of anger, interoception functions as a kind of early warning radar. Before your face flushes or your voice sharpens, your body has already begun the process of mobilization. Your diaphragm may tighten. Your breath rate increases. Your palms begin to sweat. Most people don't notice these signals until the emotion is already in full swing. But if you train yourself to sense these signals early, you can interrupt the cascade before it gains momentum. That's how you expand the window between being triggered and reacting. That window, measured in milliseconds, is where emotional choice becomes available. Training interoception requires stillness and attention. It is not about meditating in silence for hours, but about deliberate checking in with your physical self throughout the day. You are teaching your brain to map internal patterns in real time. This internal mapping strengthens communication between the insular cortex, which processes interoceptive information, and the prefrontal cortex, which manages decision-making and impulse control. The stronger that connection becomes, the more time you have between feeling provoked and doing something you might regret. Most importantly, you begin to unhook the automatic loop that makes reactivity feel inevitable. Your emotional baseline at the start of the day determines how susceptible you are to external agitation. This baseline is not random. It's constructed by what you do, feel, and focus on before the world even begins to interact with you. Pre-commitment rituals are deliberate, repeatable actions that stabilize your nervous system and anchor your behavior in predetermined responses rather than impulsive reactions. They are not about suppressing emotion or pretending to be unaffected, but about priming your brain to filter stimuli through a composed, resilient lens. The concept draws from behavioral psychology and neuroscience, particularly the idea that decisions made in neutral or low-stress states are more aligned with long-term goals than those made under duress. When you begin your day without structure, your brain enters a reactive state by default. It begins scanning for threat, novelty, or unresolved stimuli, which increases sympathetic tone and reduces emotional bandwidth. But when you create rituals that introduce predictability and internal coherence, such as breath control, focused visual anchors, or specific movement patterns, you shift the balance of activation in the nervous system. The vagus nerve, responsible for parasympathetic recovery, becomes more engaged. This engagement calms heart rate variability and stabilizes limbic reactivity. Pre-committed responses also reinforce identity-based behavior. If you tell yourself in advance, when I encounter criticism today, I will ask a clarifying question instead of defending myself. You are not just setting a goal, you are installing a behavioral script into the motor cortex and prefrontal circuitry. These scripts reduce cognitive load in the moment and make emotional self-regulation more automatic. Over time, this builds trait-level composure. Your brain begins to expect stability, and so it creates it. The ritual becomes a neurological rehearsal, and the baseline it sets determines how much of you others can shake or disturb when they attempt to impose their chaos on your nervous system. It's a common misconception that avoiding difficult people or stressful situations is the solution to emotional regulation. But the real source of chronic irritation isn't necessarily other people. It's internal friction caused by unmanaged neural load. Neural load refers to the cumulative cognitive and emotional processing demand placed on your brain at any given moment. This includes decisions you haven't made, tasks left incomplete, unregulated inputs from your environment, and unresolved emotional residue. When your neural circuits are already operating at near capacity, even minor social friction can push you into reactivity. Someone interrupting you or giving unsolicited advice doesn't seem like a major event, but if your cognitive bandwidth is already taxed, your brain will interpret it as a threat to order, stability, or control. What's often labeled as a short temper is, in many cases, a symptom of decision fatigue and overstimulation. Each unstructured choice you face throughout the day, what to eat, what to wear, whether to respond to a message, consumes executive function resources. These are the same neural systems responsible for impulse control and emotional regulation. The more you leave to spontaneous decision making, the less capacity you have to respond to people with composure and clarity. Managing neural load means building in systems that reduce the number of decisions you make on the fly and protecting your attention from unnecessary friction. When you lower your neural load through structural decisions, routine, prioritization, simplification, you create surplus energy that can be redirected to conscious awareness and calm engagement. This doesn't mean becoming robotic or rigid. It means freeing up cognitive real estate so you can actually perceive interactions for what they are, rather than reacting to them through the lens of exhaustion. The people who seem to get under your skin are often just touching the surface of unresolved neural clutter. By managing the load, you reduce the reactive amplification those people would otherwise trigger. This allows you to maintain a wider emotional buffer and longer response window. Even in unpredictable environments, the default lens through which most people view social conflict is adversarial. Someone challenges you, dismisses you, interrupts you, and your brain interprets that as a contest, your value versus theirs, your control versus their intrusion. But this is an outdated interpretation, a reflexive survival script inherited from tribal circuitry where dominance and reputation had direct consequences on access to safety and resources. In the modern world, very few social interactions truly threaten your well-being, yet your nervous system often reacts as if they do. The reframe begins when you stop seeing others as opponents and start recognizing them as mirrors, reflecting parts of you that are still reactive, unresolved, or insecure. When someone's tone bothers you, it's not just about them. It's also about the part of you that believes your dignity is vulnerable to their words. If a stranger's disrespect can throw off your state, it suggests your internal foundation is still conditional. This doesn't mean you tolerate toxic behavior or abandon boundaries, but it does mean you stop granting others the power to shape your inner climate. That power is reclaimed when you approach social tension with curiosity instead of defensiveness. The question becomes not why are they like that, but why does this touch me where it does? That shift moves you from limbic reaction to prefrontal inquiry, and with it comes emotional sovereignty. This reframing also trains a different layer of empathy, not the passive, sentimental kind, but a strategic, embodied awareness that recognizes other people's behavior as expressions of their nervous system's state. A person lashing out is often in a state of fight or flight themselves. They are revealing their level of regulation, not attacking yours. If you can hold that perspective, you turn every irritating interaction into a diagnostic tool for your own nervous system. It becomes a kind of emotional A/B testing. What still provokes me? What no longer hooks me? Over time, your tolerance increases, not through repression, but through deepened understanding. What used to offend becomes neutral data. What used to destabilize becomes a signal for refinement. This orientation creates a psychological advantage, because while others act out their dysregulation, you're tracking the system underneath it and adjusting your own with precision. Anger is not something you eliminate, it's something you learn to interpret and rewire. It's a biological event, not a moral failure. When you start to see anger as a signal rather than a self-definition, you reclaim the ability to choose your response. That choice is made possible by cultivating interoceptive awareness, the real-time sensing of your internal state, which gives you access to the milliseconds between trigger and action. In that space, you're no longer reacting, you're directing. But direction doesn't happen by accident. It requires rituals that stabilize your emotional architecture before the world imposes its demands. Pre-committed behaviors, visual cues, and breath anchors don't just make you calm, they make you ready. When you front, load control, you remove the need to search for it later when the pressure is already rising. And when you reduce your neural load, by simplifying choices, creating friction in reactivity, and removing unnecessary decisions, you're not retreating from life. You're making space to fully engage it without being hijacked. You're not protecting yourself from others. You're making yourself immune to chaos by building internal order. The final layer is reframing the entire social landscape. People who once bothered you become mirrors, diagnostic instruments showing you where your nervous system is still wired for war. You stop playing defense and start practicing observation. That shift turns every irritation into a tool, every conflict into data, and every trigger into an opportunity to tune your system even tighter. You don't need the world to be less chaotic. You need to build a nervous system that stays clean, clear, and command-driven no matter what it encounters. That's not detachment, it's mastery.